about me, I do a lot of work with Forbes magazine. A lot of the research that I come up with, a lot of the lessons that I give most likely might have started off with research for a Forbes article that I do. I write cybersecurity articles for them on a regular basis. I also do a lot of work with various news outlets. If I remotely look and sound familiar, you might have seen me talking about cybersecurity on the news. And it's kind of be a version of what I'm going to be doing today, except when I'm on the news, it's much tighter segments. And I also work with various law enforcement agencies on the task force portion of a law enforcement agency. I work with local law enforcement within various cities, and I've also done tons of work with the FBI. What I really like about working with the FBI is this is probably where I got the most valuable lesson within the world of cybersecurity. And it's something I'd want to share with you, and that is this. So I was working with this FBI agent on a particular project, and we were just talking about, FBI's involvement in really pushing the message of cybersecurity awareness and why it's so important to them. And I was always just under the impression that they're fighting cybercrime for the sake of fighting cybercrime. And they said, yeah, Danny, cybercrime is damaging and cybercrime is a big problem. But they're like, what we're really chasing, and the reason the FBI is so aggressively involved in this is we're almost more afraid of the things that cybercrime is funding. And so what do I mean by that? Well, a lot of times when a cyber criminal either hacks a company or before they hack the company, they'll spend some time on the dark web. They're either buying something or they're selling something. They're either selling what they stole or they're buying some credentials from the dark web to help breach into an organization. So what is the dark web? The dark web is the digital underground where you can essentially buy or sell whatever you want. And many of us, we've heard of the dark web probably on the news, and probably the first time we heard about the dark web, it's most likely we heard about it because someone was talking about that as relates to cybercrime itself. But the fact of the matter is although, yes, it is home to tons of cybercrime, it is home to crimes significantly worse than cybercrime. It is home to crimes like drugs, home to crimes like child pornography, home to crimes like weapons of mass destruction. All of these things that are truly detrimental to humanity are available for sale on the dark web. And every time a cyber criminal does their business, which tends to go a lot faster than some of these other truly detrimental crimes, they are making this place stronger, which is funding these crimes that are detrimental to humanity. And the reason why I tell you this, and the reason why I like to let all audiences know this, is a lot of times when we think of this as, okay, guys, let's come together, let's protect our business, let's protect our place of work. The fact of the matter is this is so much bigger than just protecting our business, as big as that is. This is about protecting our families, our society. This is about protecting our communities, because these things are having real world consequences, and we are seeing so much more of that. And of course, one of the biggest things that we keep seeing, and what we're going to be talking about today, is, of course, ransomware. You know, you following the news, you see what's happening with the pipeline attack, you see what's happening with that meat attack that they did. It is so prevalent and it's so constant on the news, and these guys are making a lot of money doing this. Now, when we hear of ransomware, what do we know of ransomware? Well, sure, ransomware, it attacks the business. It attacks even real world, it has real world effects. It attacks monies, dollars and cents. But at the root of it, what is it actually attacking? At the root of it, really what it's attacking is it's attacking data. Because what it's doing is it takes a hold of an organization, it locks down various files, it locks down various systems, it's locking down essentially data, and it's saying, if you want access to this, we'll give it to you, but you got to pay us a ransom, hence the name ransomware. Okay, so if we want to talk about staying ahead of ransomware, and we know at the root of it, ransomware is attacking that data, that's what it's grabbing hold of, then really it makes sense. What we have to have a conversation on is we have to have a conversation on data protection, because at the root of it, that's really what it's all about. So what I'm going to be touching on is I'm going to be touching on a 5-point data protection plan. Out of the 5 points, I'm not going to be spending a lot of time on a lot of them. One of them I'm going to drill down quite deeply into. And then, of course, the remaining 2, I'm going to hand off to my partners for this event, handing it off to Ryan and handing it off to Amit from Veeam and from Claudian to dive into the rest of that. So let's get started. We'll start off with a really simple one, my 5-point plan for data protection. A really simple one is keep all software up to date. Honestly, probably one of the easiest and probably one of the least expensive ways that you can protect your data is just make sure the software that you have that runs your business is always up to date. Relatively easy to do, relatively inexpensive, real simple one there, okay? Another one that I want to talk about is the importance to constantly test to find vulnerabilities. Now, we've heard of this being done through penetration tests. We've heard of this being done through vulnerability assessments. Absolutely crucial for any data protection plan is, of course, to identify, well, what are the actual threats? Where are we weak to those threats? It's really, you can't begin to build some sort of protection unless you do that. And for the last 3 points of a data protection plan is, third one is, train your staff on cybersecurity practices. This is actually where I'm going to be spending the bulk of my time, giving you guys a bunch of things to consider for how to do that. Okay, and then of course the last 2 points. This is what my partners for this event are going to be diving into when I hand it off to Ryan and Amit, and they're going to be talking about back up all information every day. They're going to give you a bunch of ways of how to do that, and of course to back up all information to a secure offsite data storage. Okay, and so that's what you're going to get from them. And for those last 3 things that I mentioned, what I love about that is so oftentimes when a company gets hit with ransomware, it's because someone within the company did something wrong. They clicked on something they shouldn't have clicked. They made some sort of fatal error. I'm going to be talking about how to avoid that. But what I love about that is Ryan and Amit, they're going to be talking about, well, what to do even if somebody gets past those defenses. Okay, so what do I love about cybersecurity awareness training? The reason why I love it is, one, it speaks to something that oftentimes the criminals are winning because of this. But 2, I love this is because oftentimes if you speak with a security professional, they might say, people who do what I do for a living might say, you know, employees are the biggest vulnerability. And I don't like looking at that. I like thinking employees are your greatest opportunity for protection. They're that first line of defense. We just got to give them the right tools and the knowledge to get them there, right? That's really what it's all about. Okay? I participated in a very, very long study where I was interviewing cyber insurance forensic specialists. I was ensuring a breach coach, legal counsel, CIA, cyber intelligence unit, the FBI cyber task force. I even got to speak to various members of the Department of Homeland Security. And essentially, I wanted to speak to people who get involved after trouble happens. And I wanted to ask them, guys, what's the #1 reason why you see these bad guys winning? And what I got from all of them, all of these pros, is they're saying 95% of all cyber breaches begin with some sort of human hacking. And in this day and age, yeah, it's kind of never been easier. Why? Because we've gotten very comfortable to put a lot of data out there that bad guys can use against it. I think this picture really kind of helps speak 1,000 words. You know, you got the one lady above where it says people in the 60s, I better not say that or the government will wiretap my house. People today, hey, wiretap, do you have a recipe for pancakes? I mean, we've gotten very, very comfortable, and it's not necessarily all our fault because there are companies making billions of dollars when we feel comfortable, and they want us to feel very comfortable, okay? And when we feel comfortable, that's really where the trouble happens, okay? And let me explain what I mean. In March 2017, the CIA was hacked. Now, when I say the CIA, so we're clear what I mean by those 3 letters, I'm talking about the Central Intelligence Agency. This is arguably the most secure organization in the world. Now, when these guys got hacked, maybe you're thinking, well, how did it happen? Well, did somebody create some sort of scientific supervirus that just cannot be stopped by any kind of machine or any kind of firewall? No, actually, that really wasn't the case, right? A discovery task force later determined that the hackers were able to succeed because the CIA employees of the group that was hacked were woefully lax when it came to a cybersecurity mindset. So what does that mean? When you don't have the right mindset, when you're dropping your guard and you haven't been given the right training or the right tools, it doesn't matter. Even if you work for the CIA, that's when the bad guys win. And so when I'm talking about the bad guys, I want to also be clear about that because I think sometimes we forget. When we think of the bad guys, this is the image that comes to mind when we say cyber criminal. And why is the image that's what comes to mind? Well, that's really because that's what the world makes us believe. You know, you do a Google image for cyber criminal or hacker, this is the picture you're going to get, or various versions of this picture. And this picture is false, unfortunately. What does this picture show us? It makes us think, well, this guy's working alone. And it doesn't look like he has a lot of money because he's working in the dark, right? Not a lot of resources, not a lot of money. Maybe he's in a basement, maybe he's in a what have you. And so we think to ourselves, like, it doesn't seem that scary. Here, let me show you what the real criminals are. So this is not a stock photo. This is a real picture. This is taken from the BBC tech scam expose footage, where what they did was they hacked a security camera within an actual tech scam call center. Okay, so everyone in this photo is an actual criminal. Okay, now what don't I see here? I don't see anyone wearing a hoodie. I've combed through that photo quite a bit of times. I don't see a single hoodie in that photo. I don't see anyone working in the dark. It actually looks quite well lit. I see a lot of computers. I see a lot of people. They look like they're collaborating. And if you look at the front, I see a whiteboard there, and it looks to be that they're tracking information. What do you think they're tracking? They're tracking the same thing that any call center tracks. This is what the criminals really, in fact, are. Okay, now, we add further complications, and the further complications really is that so many people are working from home. And this is something, of course, that happened as a result of what happened in 2020, and it's still happening now. And this really also changes the mindset, because from an organizational point of view, you don't just need to think about securing your employees. I hate to say this because this makes some organizations a little bit nervous, but we have to think about securing really their whole family. And what I mean by that is if you have an employee that has a family that's not secure, then you have an employee that's not secure. Probably the most lighthearted way I can show you what I mean by that is, of course, this screen grab here. And if you haven't seen the video that this came from, do yourself a favor and do a Google search for lawyer cat video. And it is honestly the funniest thing that you're going to see. It was absolutely hilarious. So basically, this is court cam footage. Virtual court cam footage that made its way online. It became virtual, and what happened is that cat box is a lawyer, and the lawyer is kind of upset because he goes, guys, obviously I'm not a cat here. He goes, but my daughter downloaded this filter, and he seems sad, he seems upset, and the cat face is sad. So as the cat's lips are moving, the lawyer's talking. I was howling with laughter. And he went on to say how he goes, my daughter downloaded this cat filter. I can't turn it off. He's having his assistants. They're all trying to turn it off. Nobody can turn this thing off. Okay. And it's a serious courtroom video. Okay. Now this was relatively harmless. Yes, it went viral. Yes, it was super embarrassing for that lawyer, I would imagine. But it's relatively harmless other than the embarrassment. What if the daughter downloaded something way worse inadvertently? Right? This is what's happening now, right? It's not enough to just talk to the employees. We got to now talk to their entire families because it's all on the same network, okay? Now, that being said, I'm talking about the importance of training. I'm talking about the importance of educating, right? And occasionally I will have someone pick my brain about this, and they'll say, Danny, the concept of security awareness, that actual training really has been around for like 20 years now. It gets pretty old. Right? And some people will say, how come it seems like things aren't better? I mean, we are training people. We are doing this. How come it seems like it doesn't actually work? If I keep saying, hey, guys, this is how the bad guys are winning because people aren't trained, so make sure you train them. And people are like, but we are training them, Danny, and the bad guys still win. What's the problem? So here's the problem. The problem is when we train, typically what we do is we approach it with a sharing information mindset instead of approaching it with a changing behavior mindset. Let me give you an analogy to explain what I mean, right? Let's say you got an employee, and let's say the employee is notoriously late for meetings, okay? And they're just always late. They're never on time, and sometimes they don't show up at all. Now, does that employee suffer from a lack of information? Or does that employee suffer from not knowing when the meeting is, from not knowing how to get there, not knowing certain things, the what and the hows, and other associated questions? No, that's really a motivation thing, all right? So simply telling that employee all the what's and all the hows in the world, it's not doing it. You really need to nail the why, as in, I'm going to tell you why you can't be late for this next meeting. And when you address the why, when you properly motivate them with the why, all the other things, the what and the hows, they take care of themselves, and that's how you have behavior change. Right? Now, when it comes to cybersecurity awareness, what I see what a lot of companies do is they'll buy a platform and they'll say, okay, I got my phishing, I got my platform, these guys are certified, I'm done, right? The employees take the test and then they wonder, it doesn't seem like you're actually getting really any better. right? And well, why is that? It's because the employees are thinking, oh, I'm not important enough. Nobody wants me. I don't care. And they go through that test really fast because they're not really motivated to understand why they need to take it super seriously. Okay. I did some studies, and you want to know most modules, most learning modules, even ones that are 20 to 30 minutes long, they get completed on average in 1 minute and 43 seconds. Man, that would almost be impressive if it wasn't actually sad, right? How do you complete a 20-minute module in 1 minute, 43 seconds? Well, you do it by not reading anything and by clicking, okay? But if we properly address them with the why and really get them motivated, right, that's how we get them on board. So how do we do that? Well, when we address the why with regard to cybersecurity awareness, the way that we do that, there's three things that you want to do, and then I'll give you a fourth bonus, right? One is, got to get them to believe that cybercrime is an actual real problem. A lot of people in society really don't. And it's not their fault. It's not their job. It's up to us to convey that message. If they don't believe that this is a real problem, all the do's and don'ts in the world, all the portals in the world, it is not going to make a difference at all. You also got to get them to understand specifically what those consequences mean to them. And there are a lot of them. That same reason why I said we got to secure the family, that's also, you can use that to your advantage to say, guys, if something bad happens, like you personally could be affected, this can affect your family. A lot of times I'll have organizations when they'll introduce me to their team to do some security awareness training, and they'll say, guys, if we get breached, we're going to lose a lot of money. I'm not going to get my bonus. So you better listen to what Danny has to say. That's the wrong approach, because most people might not care whether or not their boss gets their bonus. You got to let them know how this affects them. And of course, you want to empower them. Not empower them through fear by saying, hey, if you click on the wrong thing, you're going to get fired, but empower them by motivating them to know that they can make a difference, by saying, hey, just doing a few things slightly differently, you can really do a great job on protecting your society, your community, and protecting your family, okay? And of course, make it interactive. Right? And so what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is have at least one portion of the training that you do instructor-led. I'm not talking that has to be monthly. I'm talking even once a year, have an actual human speak to the employees. What a lot of organizations do is they'll roll out this training. They'll say, guys, it's mandatory. You got to take this portal training. It's super important. But we're telling them it's so important, I'm not going to be answering any of your questions. I'm going to be putting you on this online thing that's not interactive at all, not answering any questions. That's how important it is. You're giving them the sign that's really, they're saying, yeah, actually, I don't think that's very important at all. So you want to have one part of that training, even once a year, to be instructor-led. You want to have some ongoing dark web monitoring. We're going to be giving you that one-time dark web scan, but you want to have it ongoing, because if an employee does something wrong, dark web monitoring is going to allow you to see those credentials available on the dark web, okay? Do you want to have phishing campaigns? Yes, this is most likely something you might already be doing. This is probably one of the more common ones, but without those first two, you're doing yourself a disservice. And yes, even though I've kind of been making fun of a training platform or those training portals, you do want to have something like that, because it kind of ties it all together for those employees that might have been hired after your once a year instructor-led session. If you have something like this, you got yourself a solid session. Now, when you're covering this stuff and when you're giving employees training on what they need to know on those do's and don'ts, one of the things that you can use to make sure you're covering what needs to be covered, whoever is doing this for you, is the cybercrime equation. The cybercrime equation is something that I developed working with various law enforcement across Canada and the States. And essentially what it is it's a variation of something that law enforcement has created for physical safety. Law enforcement has created something called the crime equation, or the crime triangle. And basically what that is it's victim plus criminal plus environment equals crime. And the idea is, if you know this 4-point plan, you're going to know how to keep yourself safe in physical situations. And I saw a cop do a lesson on that. I absolutely loved it. And so I worked with them to create the cyber version of that. So we created this, which is Target. What you want to do is, whatever training you're giving, you want to make sure that it covers to your employees what the bad guys actually want. We can't expect our employees to protect something if they don't know what the bad guys want. And the fact of the matter is, I think people by nature are extremely secure. We just don't know what we need to secure. Things have changed, right? Picture yourself walking in a dark alley. And picture yourself, you've turned the corner, you don't feel safe. And you see some people and then they're big and they look strong and they've got tattoos and they look super dangerous. And you suddenly get scared. And picture you're in that situation, picture that you've got a wad of cash in your pocket. Are you gonna take that cash out and suddenly start counting it in front of these guys? No, of course not. Why? Because you don't feel safe and you know that that cash is valuable to dangerous people. But what happens if it's not the cash that they want? What happens if they want information? Why would we think that we need to protect this if no one's taught us that? I'll give you an example about a driver's license. So with the driver's license, I got my driver's license when I was 16. And I was told, it's kind of a community thing, a society thing. Hey, proudly show that thing to anyone, because it's not just ID, but it's a sense of accomplishment. I was showing my driver's license to anyone that would ask to look at it. And all of a sudden, one day, I'm getting some training, and it's like, oh, Danny, ease off. You better not show that thing, because that could really be used against me. Well, if I never had the training, why would I think to do it, right? But simply knowing what's valuable to the bad guys, that in and of itself will protect you. And by the way, just a side story on that and how devastating that can be. There was a case that I had worked on where a gentleman was a victim of identity theft, and the perpetrator took out $150,000 in this guy's name, okay? Now, as bad as that is, I've seen way worse than that. The reason this guy's story sticks out to me is 8 months prior to that, this guy was rejected from the bank for a loan of $10,000, okay? So his credit was not good enough to get himself $10,000, yet a perpetrator could take out $150,000 in his name. Well, how'd that happen? Well, the way that happened was the perpetrator took out a series of mini loans, okay? You see the commercials, hey, you got bad credit, no problem. We'll give you a loan of up to $5,000, right? Of course, they jack up the interest rate. You don't want to take out a loan in that name, in that way, but if you're not planning on paying it back and you plan to take a series of that, then what's the problem? Okay, basically the perpetrator got this guy's mail forwarded for 35 days before the guy noticed, and in those 35 days he requested a series of mini loan applications, and he started a process to really put this guy's life on hold for a very, very long time. When we did the digital forensics to find out what it was, what the guy get the hold of that started this terrible process, it was a driver's license number and his birthday. That was it, okay? Now, if we don't know that, and if we don't know the other things involved there, what are the other things that are very dangerous, why would we think and act differently? So that's the first part of the equation. You want to make sure that's thoroughly covered. The second part is the attack. How are the bad guys coming after what they want? Of course, also the vulnerability, right? Let's talk to them about the vulnerabilities of passwords, of emails, of the web, right? Think about that example that I gave about the dangerous alleyway, right? We will automatically think and act differently if we recognize we're in a dangerous environment. But what if that dangerous alleyway isn't an alleyway at all? What if it makes you feel very comfortable because it's your home or your bedroom, because you're online? Unless someone is letting you know about these things, why would we think and act differently? And of course, most importantly, we teach them what to do once something has happened. Let's take a look at Uber. In 2016, Uber suffered a breach. And they were very embarrassed. They didn't tell anyone. And the bad guys took them for $100K. $100K really for a company like Uber, not that big a deal. But because they were embarrassed, they did everything wrong afterwards. And they were fined by the government for $147 million. Keep that in mind. The bad guys took $100K. The government fined them $147 million. In other words, we want to make sure that our employees know what is the process once something has gone wrong. We don't want them keeping this from us because the problem is going to get so much worse. So in short, as I'm coming close to the end of my 30 minutes and before I hand it over to Ryan, I really want to stress on the importance of training. Make sure to train your team. Make sure to follow the guidelines that I talked about here from a program like this, where you get them an instructor, you get them some ongoing dark web monitoring. Yes, phishing and a platform, that's part of it as well, but those first two are also very, very key. Make sure this stuff here is covered. through your training, the target, the attack, the vulnerability, the impact. And now let's segue over to Ryan. What I love about what these guys are going to be covering is I spent a lot of time talking about the importance of having a cybersecurity awareness program in place. And I spent talking about how teaching your employees, giving them the tools, how to spot that trouble so they don't let that ransomware in. But what I love about what Ryan's going to be talking about is Ryan's going to be talking about something that can really help you should the bad guys get through those defenses anyways. Okay, so Ryan, if you're here, I'm going to have you take over, and you'll get to your piece then.
Thanks very much, Danny, and appreciate the overview. Well, we love having Danny on these kind of talks because there's no bias. He gives it to us straight from a very unique perspective of lots of years in security. So thank you for that, Danny. So my name is Ryan Narayan. I'm the area director for Veeam in Canada today. And Veeam is a leader in data protection solutions, especially in the cloud data world today. Now, I am going to talk to you a little bit about ransomware, and you're like, well, Veeam's a backup data protection company. How did they end up in the world of ransomware? We are finding that while we're not typically categorized as a security company, the way I kind of describe it is, we're all collectively in IT trying to build the best fortress we possibly can. I'm trying to have that moat. I'm trying to have that bridge. I'm trying to put all these protections up front before the ransomware attacks. Where data protection and backup comes into place is that what if all those elements fail and your last line of defense to get your data back up and running is backup, a secondary copy of your data, and that's where we specialize. And getting that RPO and RTO around that is where we excel in the market today, whether it's a simple little file all the way to a full application to a whole data center altogether. And the last 18 months, 2020 and 2021 has been an interesting year for all of us. Hopefully everybody can see my screen here. But we've gone through a lot of different things. Number one, we all know about the pandemic. I'm not going to be the pandemic bad news bear. We all know what's happened there. We all lived through it. But we did see a transformation in IT during that period of time, along with and a lot of people working from home, working remotely, and working in a distributed fashion. And ransomware also started to take advantage of those scenarios, as Danny kind of alluded to already, a much more sophisticated manner that we've seen in the history of working in the IT industry today. And, as a person who kind of manage IT, you're probably seeing a lot more risk, and you see a lot more uncertainty, a lot more being asked of you that is a little bit atypical than the typical just get my systems up and running and applications running. There are a lot more risks and uncertainty around it and new challenges. And with that, which is some of you see as a good opportunity. This is also an opportunity for us to learn. More transformation has been happening in IT, some of it for the positive, by adopting new technology, things you've been trying to push as initiatives in your companies for many years. Maybe there was not an appetite, but all of a sudden they suddenly got accelerated, and that's exciting as well to be in this industry as well. But the ransomware piece is real to the Canadian market. Danny kind of alluded to it, but I'm going to just play this clip that we got from Global National. I've condensed it a little bit, and it kind of talks about what we're seeing in the market in a summary as well.
4 days after the hack, this critical supply of U.S. energy remains at a standstill, interrupting the daily flow of 2.5 million barrels of diesel, gasoline, and jet fuel, nearly half the supply of the U.S. East Coast. On Friday, hackers broke into Colonial Pipeline's business operations and launched a ransomware attack. The company shut down the pipeline to protect the rest of its computers. The FBI says a Russian cyber gang called DarkSide is to blame. It's not clear if the action was state-sponsored.
At this time, we assess that DarkSide is a criminal actor, but that's certainly something that our intelligence community is looking into.
Ransomware attacks are typically about money, not disruption. Hackers encrypt a victim's computer files so they can't be accessed and demand a hefty payment to unlock them.
These groups are realizing that by targeting industrial companies, they get higher payouts. And the companies are more willing to pay out because they want to return these vital operations.
The U.S. is reeling from a string of more traditional cyber attacks that have exposed vulnerabilities. A water treatment plant in Florida was hacked in what's believed to have been an attempt to poison the water supply. And the U.S. government is still assessing the damage from the massive SolarWinds data breach. Even if the Colonial hack was just about money, it could cause price hikes and supply shortages if it drags on. It's not known how much money the hackers wanted or if Colonial paid the ransom to unlock its computers. Officially, the White House says it's not getting involved because the hack involves a private company. Donna.
All right, Jackson, thanks. Well, no one knows for sure how often ransoms are paid, but it's believed about $18 billion was paid around the world last year. In Canada, it's estimated $797 million was paid in 2020. Ransom demands have increased significantly in this country. As Mike LeCouture explains, attackers are also becoming more and more sophisticated.
They probably picked the worst day in our company's history to try and hold us ransom.
Jan Gritskovich and his team were about to submit the largest bid in the company's history. On the morning of April 16th, his employees logged on and realized there was a serious problem with their computer system.
This cell came up and basically said, you've been hacked. If you want to collect your information, basically, here's our email address.
No, they never responded and never found out how much the hackers wanted. Regular backups of their system helped save most of the information, but the delay in submitting that bid may have cost them a multi-million-dollar contract. And cybersecurity specialists say the timing of that attack was likely well planned.
4 days after the hack, this
So guys, I think, between Danny and some of these videos, and I think we're all seeing these in the news, there's a lot more activity around ransomware. The reason why I play this video is to point out that, sometimes we're in our own world. We don't see these attacks in Canada, but the reality is almost close to $1 billion were paid out last year, which is significant. We've done these events in the past, and I've seen more and more hands up raised in the audience of more people paying ransomware than I've ever seen before. And the one thing I thought you might catch in that video, though, is that that organization that was kind of referred to there did have a ransomware attack, did go down, but backup was able to save them. And they had a strong data protection strategy. They happened to be a Veeam customer, and we had the opportunity to debrief with them to understand how they were able to overcome that overall. And there were many other organizations. What happens after these attacks, Veeam may or may have helped with the solution, or we'd be able to talk to our customers. Well, what happened? How were you able to overcome? How were you able to move business forward? And it seems to be, Danny kind of alluded to it. These common traits are what we're seeing in the market for a strong protection strategy to protect yourselves against that. Danny talked a lot about these guys, keeping all software up to date, penetration testing to find any vulnerabilities. We talked about that dark web scan as a potential, but there are other tests as well too. We're just trying to provide a tool to help you guys out here. Training all staff. Danny spoke about this, but I'll talk a little bit a different way about us. Segregation of control. And smaller organizations or mid-sized organizations, maybe you're one person holds all the control, and that's also a single point of failure that could be potentially there. And 5 and 6 is where we specialize, both Cloud and Veeam, is backing up information all day and backing that information up to offsite locations, which we'll talk a little bit about today. But let's just talk about that keeping all the software up to date. So, like I said before, Veeam has we protect over 14,000 customers here in Canada today, over 400,000 customers worldwide with our solution today. And yes, some of those customers have been hit ransomware and have to be able to use our solution to recover to them. But we've also sat down with them after the attack happened and said, what was the cause of those attacks? What we are seeing as a common theme across a lot of these attacks, especially ones I've debriefed here locally in Canada, it seems to be hitting out-of-date software as a central point of failure, something that's maybe not supported by the vendor or the manufacturer. And they seem to be, there has been a handful of Linux attacks, but they're predominantly Windows-based, and they're not always attacking the same place. But we are seeing one common thread that's popping up a lot is Windows 2003, any version of permutation there or thereafter. That there seems to be the most common access that we're seeing a lot from our customers today. So I would say this statement applies to all out-of-date software, especially anything that's not supported by the vendor, but keeping that software up to date. Those software updates are just not about functionality, but it's also maybe they've already found a flaw from another customer and they're trying to correct the code so it doesn't happen to you. So keep that software regularly up to date is a prevention tool in itself. So I would encourage everybody to do so. I know they get annoying. Nobody likes Patch Tuesdays. Nobody likes going through all those and getting all these errors, but there's a method to the madness to save your company thousands of dollars. The other one we talked about, so I don't want to reiterate this too much, but I just kind of want to reinforce what Danny was saying is education is key. I like what he said about instructor-led, giving your staff regular training. So Veeam also is kind of not only we are, and I sound like the hair club for president for men. We're not just just a user. We're also a client. You know, we're also doing a lot of education to our internal staff about how they can protect against ransomware. And yes, we get a regular training following some very different common frameworks against prevention on a regular basis as a backup and data protection company. But, you know, one method of training is what Danny talked about is, you know, instructor-led, but another one is practical training. And what I mean by that is, you know, you as an IT organization can probably try sample phishing attacks to your own staff to see how many of the staff actually will click on the ransomware and how they won't. It doesn't have to be real. You can self-create it just to see a test in your own internal organization, how many people clicked it. And what's really good as a IT manager, you'll know who's clicked on it and who's not, who needs more education, who doesn't, and you can share those reports and data with your senior executives saying, listen, I just tried this with our own staff last week. You know, this staff needs more training, this doesn't, and it reinforces the point that I need we need to do some more about ransomware. So it helps you build your own business case internally. Last but not least is that, you know, internally at Veeam, we've also put some tools into our own processes. So it enables an employee to report an attack immediately as it happens. So it's not lost in some convoluted service desk ticket or IT help desk ticket. You know, there's a clear email for clear action. If they have something they think is, lack of a better term, fishy or unusual, they can report that to the appropriate people so you can act on it quickly, because you don't want it to spread through your organization like wildfire. So we talked about two other areas. So we talked about education. We talked about keeping your software up to date. We talked about assessments and vulnerability testing. Danny talked about one. Another area that I'm seeing a lot of our organizations, especially our mid-sized organizations, where, you know, you might be an employee that be wearing multiple hats in the organization. You've been there the longest. You know, you're the trusted, the wise Yoda within the organization of where all the, you know, how to manage the storage, how to manage the backup, all the AD, and you happen to have all the credentials, and you become very efficient of troubleshooting problems within the organization. But I kind of call this person. Maybe this is you in your organization, maybe this is a friend, but let's call it, for the sake of this conversation, it's Dave. Dave's been there for a long time. He has all the credentials for the whole organization as a domain admin. He's been managing and troubleshooting all those issues, anything with domain problems and group policies, whatever it may be. He also happens to be the backup administrator and has all the credentials for that. And, you know, we talked about backup as your last line of defense as a separate copy of your data. He also is the administrator for that. He's also the storage administrator. So for your primary copy of data, he also has access of copy of that data. Dave has credentials for all three. He now has all that. He might be storing that on his computer, might be storing that on his personal data. That becomes a huge single point of failure or risk for your organization. Now, you're like, well, Dave needs to have access to all these systems. I don't want to take away any security measures from Dave, but your security, unfortunately, to make sure that it's really protects against anybody getting in your environment, sometimes it needs to be a little inconvenient. So spreading these credentials across your organization, even though, you know, Dave is, you know, can troubleshoot a lot of small problems really quickly for us, separating these roles and responsibility mitigates risk for your organization. At a minimum, think about multi-factor authentication for all these three platforms or any others that are really crucial to the organization. Don't let it sit with one person in the organization altogether. You know, when Veeam talks about data protection and when we debrief a lot of customers who've had success or failures, you know, the common theme that comes across it is we believe in something called the 3-2-1 rule. And the 3-2-1 rule is not something Veeam created, not something Cloudian created, a general industry and rule in the industry that a lot of data protection practitioners follow, which is 3 copies of data on 2 different media, one of that offsite in a separate location or storage media, and making sure you're able to quickly recover from that. I kind of want to reinforce that offsite, that it needs to be air gapped or protected so it's not connected to your production environment. That's where some of the gaps of ransomware is, that maybe it's affected production and it's seeped into backup. If you keep that data air capped or a levels of protection around that offsite, we see a lot of more success around it as well. And last but not least, I would say these rules don't just apply to on-premise data. This framework applies to cloud workloads as well. Don't assume that just because you're using cloud applications or cloud workloads, maybe you're using Salesforce, maybe you're using Office 365, don't assume that the manufacturer in that cloud SaaS offering is doing this 3-2-1 rule for you. It might be on you to take ownership of that yourself. And in fact, when we talk to a lot of customers, that is a very common scenario, especially around, I'm using Office 365 as an example, but there's a lot of different clouds out there. Veeam happens to protect a lot of them, but 67% of the organization, one of the largest cloud platforms out there, Office 365, where, it's probably the central point for where a lot of ransomware hits is via email or exchange. 67% of them are unprotected today in the cloud world today. Now, you might be saying, well, I'm using Office 365 and I'm protected. I bought the top of the notch, biggest widgets from Microsoft. They gave me all the redundancies and all the things they have. And I'm maybe I have a Microsoft Office 365 E5 contract, and you're like, I'm protected. The way I kind of describe this to a lot of organizations, kind of having that same train of thought, is I think of it as when I want to protect my car, all right, I rather than leaving it on the street, I usually go into paid parking garage, right? I feel like if I put my car in there versus on the street, I feel more protected, right? So I pay my $20. It has a little gate, we all know the little gate that protects it. That little gate gives me a level of security when it comes down. But when you pay your $20 or $30, I'm in Toronto, so it's coming to like $50 now, which is ridiculous. So that's another thing, another day. But when you pay for your parking and you get that little ticket back, whatever fee you paid for, have you ever flipped it over and read the liability on the back? If you read the liability in the back, it clearly said, here's this one example here for one: the management hereby declares itself not responsible for for damage, fire, theft, or loss of your car. I just paid $20 to put my car in this safe spot, and if anything happens to the car, it's still my liability. And when you think about it, you're like, that's preposterous, but that's the reality of how a lot of these operations work. And that same kind of methodology also applies in a lot of different SaaS platform as a service applications as well. I happen to be picking on Microsoft today, but Microsoft or AWS or Google, or choose any of those permutations, have these same kind of scenarios in it. I'm using Microsoft Office 365 because I'm talking about that today, but Microsoft calls it the shared responsibility model, where they talk about their primary responsibility is the infrastructure, keeping the uptime of it, but the data that resides in Office 365, the access, the control, keeping that data safe is your responsibility as a user. And they're not taking any liability for that. They support the technology, but the backup of your data is your responsibility, right? They have a recycling bin to keep you a little bit safe, just in case, but longer term retentions for governance and compliance, or longer term backups, or for ransomware protections, that's a responsibility of you. The longer term you can go back. In actuality, what we found when we debriefed with a lot of customers, after a ransomware attack hits or some kind of phishing attack happens, it usually takes about 140 days from the actual initial email for the IT organization to realize what happens. Now, if you think about 140 days, how long do you hold stuff in a recycling bin? 90 days, right? That's probably the standard retention within Office 365. By that time, all the evidence might be gone if it was deleted accidentally and put into the recycling bin. Security, very outlined. Infrastructure level is all Microsoft's responsible for. Data level is your responsibility. And any regulatory requirements, they'll have the basics of data privacy and HIPAA, but everything above and beyond that for your particular vertical. Maybe you have ISO, maybe you're in a certain particular vertical that meets PCI compliance. That's the responsibility of you. But it's the same principle as the back of the ticket here, guys. These cloud applications, yes, they say they have some level of security and they have some redundancy here, but true protection against, worst case scenarios, that's not their responsibility, and they will remove themselves from liability of that. So you as a user responsible, who is the protector of your data for your organization, the viability, the bloodline of your organization, that falls on you, whether you're using on-premise or cloud or otherwise. So guys, that's my spiel about what we're seeing in the market and where we're debriefing for a lot of customers. It's my turn. I'm going to warn you here, guys. I'm a Veeam employee. We got to pay the bills here. I'm going to warn you. I'm going to give you a Veeam commercial here. I have drank the Kool-Aid. I've talked to a lot of customers. I believe in the product. But Veeam's vision fundamentally is to be a leader in cloud data protection and cloud data management. Whether your workloads are, cloud can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. We believe that, today, maybe you're using a private cloud on-premise today. Maybe you're just using solely cloud applications. Maybe you're using a multi-cloud approach and using a lot of these different formats. Veeam wants to be the provider of protection across all these platforms in a single solution in a simple, reliable, and flexible manner. As your organization evolves and one starts to burst, other one starts to reduce, you can still use a data protection platform across the board. And we've had a lot of success around this. We've been helping during the pandemic. We've been helping a lot of customers, especially around Office 365 workloads, protecting those workloads, Azure workloads, AWS workloads, because we've seen a significant increase during the pandemic, protecting those workloads. And customers are reusing their existing investments in Veeam and using that same platform to extend their protection across those workloads as well. And also to harden it against security as well. And Gartner, IDC, I didn't put Forrester on here because I wanted to stay semi-humble here, but we are recognized in these spaces as well. And a lot of customers continue to use us. And, like I said before, is that we pride ourselves to provide protection across all different platforms. Sometimes you might have heard of us, and we started our world in the world of virtualization on-premise workloads, and we did that very well and very efficient. People are able to recover, but we do a lot more than that. We cover AWS and Azure workloads, Google Cloud, IBM Cloud, on-premise workloads, mainframe, AIX. We cover Linux. We cover Oracle. We cover large file shares. We also cover Kubernetes as well too, containers as well. So our breadth and reach of our portfolio under one single platform to make your life easier and as your organization shifts and change, is something we pride ourselves in to help you guys out. And hopefully you take a look at this anytime you're looking at anytime you're adding a new production workload for whatever the main reason, think about your protection strategy and think of Veeam in that space. We started with helping at the basics of backup and recovery, but we also extend that to monitoring, helping you with governance and compliance, helping you with that mobility from maybe today you're using all in AWS and you want to go to Azure or vice versa. We want to be able to give you the flexibility and no lock-in around that, help you with that, and also make your life a lot easier as an IT manager so you're not having to continually do all the detour tests, do all this tweaking. Can we orchestrate and automate that for you? And that's what we try to help our customers with today. And if you want to learn more, I'm more than happy to have you sit down with myself or one of our architects to understand if we're a good for you. Our partnership between our organizations is a good fit or not. And taking that one step further, we've spent a lot of time developing our solutions with the broader ecosystem, and we spent a lot of time, especially in the world of ransomware, with our partners at Cloudian, who specialize in the world of ransomware, and co-testing on both our Veeam solution with their Cloudian technology to make sure that it's validated for any customer who wants to use it. And what I'm going to have Amit talk to a little bit about is how they take Veeam's solution of protection to the next level, providing an overall protection for your environment. So Amit, over to you.
Thank you, Ryan. So, by the way, you were not just semi-humble, you were very humble, and you were very eloquent in the way you positioned, Veeam and the overall cybersecurity angle that posture that you guys take. So today, guys, I'm going to talk to you guys, to everybody about Cloudian and our hardened object storage solution that together with Veeam provides you a very, very robust solution for ransomware protection. The theme today is very clearly cybersecurity, and we're going to talk a little about ransomware specifically, right? Next slide, please. Yeah, so as we talk about ransomware, right, you guys heard it is the fastest growing malware threat, and what you guys heard about today is the typical type of ransomware that you have, which encrypts user data or business data, renders it completely unusable where it resides, and holds it for ransom. Right? Payments are typically demanded untraceable cryptocurrency. Now, what you also should know is that these threats are the most common type of attacks that are happening today in the cyber world. Right? It is the fastest growing threat to businesses of all kinds. Companies are experiencing these attacks. In a survey that Sophos conducted, and some of the numbers that you see here are coming directly from that report. Across 2020, 51% of the companies surveyed said they already had experienced an attack. 73% of those said that their data was successfully encrypted, which means they actually could not conduct their business. And the average ransomware payout has actually increased in 2020 to $761,000 equivalent, right? And what you also see on the right-hand side is facts and figures about where these attacks are actually taking place. So if you look at it, majority of the successful attacks happened in the cloud, and out of that, public cloud is actually a big target, right? What you don't see over here in these slides is information that's coming up from a forward-looking perspective and 2021 perspective. The threat vectors of ransomware are evolving and changing further. Now you see in the dark web, as Danny mentioned, there are many tools and techniques that hackers and bad actors are using. You actually have ransomware as a service available. It's easy now for hackers to go in, or at least sophisticated one to go in and put these pick these tools from the dark web and become a ransomware attacker in no time, right? Data exfiltration is another threat vector, and it's a new form of ransomware that's coming into visibility, right? And overall, the size of ransom demanded is going up quite a bit as we speak. It is definitely the wise of our time, and we are here to talk to you about how the solution between Veeam and Cloudian gives you an option to protect it, right? So if we look at it, how do you protect against this threat that's not only imminent, it's here and now, right? So typically your best defense has been backup, backup, backup. Simple, easy, but guess what? Sophisticated hackers understand that that's your way out of this kind of a threat. So today, what you see is hackers are not only going after your primary data, but they're also going after your backup data. If you look at how do you actually protect against such a big threat and constantly evolving threat, well, look no further than what Forrester has put together as one of their holy grails for ransomware protection. What Forrester says is there are 4 main technologies that combine to help you avoid or work around the threat of ransomware attacks. And key out of that is implementing an immutable file system with an underlying worm storage. So what exactly is immutability here, right? Immutability means just simply means tamper-proof or non-changeable file system where once your data lands in there, it cannot be changed. And worm storage is write once, read many, which pretty much helps implement the immutability in the storage tier of it. So once data is written into a worm storage, it can be read many times, but it cannot be modified or deleted. And that's what the solution is about. Next slide, please. So quick commercial for Cloudian here before I get any further. So I'm going to be talking to you guys about the solution for Veeam and Cloudian. And what Cloudian here is an on-premises S3 compatible object storage system, which is built natively on the S3 API protocols. For most of you, when you talk about S3, you only think about AWS S3. Well, S3 is really the API protocol, and we've used the same protocol that AWS has used to build their flagship storage product, and we brought it on-prem and enable you to build your own cloud in your own data center behind your firewalls, right? As commercials stand, I do want to say you can start small with Cloudian and grow into exabytes, get all the flexibility and all the scalability of the cloud, and it is hybrid cloud, multi-cloud enabled, which means you can start with your applications on-prem, and certain applications that need to stay on-prem can stay on-prem, but we can also tier out to the cloud at the back end, which means you can have a hybrid cloud environment. We have been recognized across the board by multiple organizations, Gartner Peer Insights, Choice Awards, and so on, and so Customer Choice Awards, and so on and so forth, as one of the leading providers of object storage on-prem vendors. Next slide, please. So on our solution with Veeam, right? So we are the first vendor to offer an end-to-end immutability story for data immutability with Veeam based on the industry standard object lock functionality. Now, what this gives you is a tried and tested solution that has been verified across not just by us, but Veeam has verified it. We have multiple customers using the solution for specifically to prevent against the threat of ransomware attacks. Next slide, please. So as I said, this particular solution, which is what I'm going to dig into a little bit more and give you guys a little more insights on this, is based on the industry standard S3 object lock. What object lock is a feature in the S3 API list, which helps you implement the worm part of the storage. So what this does is it goes down to the lowest granularity that is possible in an object storage system, which is the object, and locks the object up so that any data that's going to land in this object is completely unchangeable for a specific duration of time, right? And what is that duration of time? You can specify that duration of time at the time of the bucket creation, and your data is immutable only for that particular duration of time. Next slide, please. Sorry, can you go back to the previous slide? I forgot to mention. So S3 Object Lock is the functionality that Cloudian supports, but not just Cloudian. Veeam also supports that same industry standard API. And that's why the solution of Veeam and Cloudian for immutability is so seamless. Now, Veeam implemented S3 Object Lock in their product in the early 2020s. I think it was with V10 they released their support for S3 Object Lock, and Cloudian was 1 month earlier to that. We released our Object Lock functionality in 7.2. With that, we were able to seamlessly integrate our solutions and offer this this immutability package together for our customers right out of the gate. Next slide, please. But it's not just enough to talk about the S3 Object Lock, which is a software functionality, right? What happens if a sophisticated hacker actually gets into your system at the root level? As Ryan was talking about his imaginary figure, Dave, who has root access to all kind of systems, and if he has access to the storage system as well, and he's a storage admin, he could easily go into the root and just delete the entire storage system. Everything is based in software today, so if you can get access to the root, you can delete systems, and that's the insider threat. A hacker getting access to Dave's credentials can do the same and still hold you for ransom. So it's not just enough to have implementation for S3 Object Lock. That's where we've been spending time in hardening Cloudian's flagship product at government level security features to make sure that doesn't happen. Now, as a hardened storage, when we ship Cloudian in the worm mode, we actually enable things like secure shell, integrate firewall, role-based authentications and access controls. And very, very, very important, we also disable the root of the storage before we ship it out to customers. Now, you will still have access to the system admin level user, which is also a privileged user, but that user will also not have access to the root. It is one of the requirements of security certification SEC Rule 17A4 that when you ship your system in worm mode, you actually disable root, and we are certified for that. And because of that, there is no way for you to get access to the root level users if you are actually buying Cloudian in worm mode. This is for protection specifically against sophisticated ransomware attacks as well as insider threats. Right? Beyond that, we are certified against a variety of security certifications that are implemented across US government, EMEA, North American laws like common criteria that also apply in Canada. And pretty much one of the most hardened or security rich storage vendors out there for on-prem that is standalone right now. Next slide, please. Here's a slide on how the solution actually looks with Veeam. So on the Veeam side, right, this is a standard-based connect on the S3 API. This basically Veeam and Cloudian connect at the Veeam cloud tier. So Veeam backup has the first tier where all the backups land, which is the performance tier, which typically needs to be a NAS or a direct attached storage. And then there is the capacity tier or the cloud tier, which is based on S3 APIs. And that's where Cloudian resides on Veeam. What you see here is this creates a logical air gapping of all your data backups when they're done with Veeam. And it's actually quite clever, right? In the traditional sense, air gapping would mean you actually take the data and keep it offline in some vault. And the problem with those kind of things is when you actually have to retrieve the data, it's a real manual lift and a manual effort to get it back. With the way the backups are structured with Veeam, your performance tier and your primary data tier are on typically on a block or file-based storage system, which has its own authentication and access controls, and your backup is on a completely different network. So even if the hacker gets into a system and they hack into your primary tier, guess what? They haven't hacked through the authentication or access controls on the capacity or the cloud tier, and that creates the virtual air gapping.
Yeah, I made a quick question, if you don't mind me asking, on that one slide.
Yeah, go ahead, London.
So I obviously know the answer, but I get this question a lot of times, and I feel like it's probably a good idea to ask it for the benefit of the group. Well, let's say that we're not in a situation where it's an external attack. Let's say that someone gets the 2 weeks notice and they decide on the last day to leave a goodbye gift for the company by deleting all their data or doing something with that. How does the immutability can help? How can immutability can help with that?
So that's the Dave scenario, right? In Ryan's slides, that was Dave, the system admin, who had access to pretty much the backup systems, the storage systems, and if you fire him, he's gonna create a house fire by deleting or doing whatever. It's possible that he can do it. So with immutability, and specifically with Cloudian's Hyperstore, as I mentioned, when you ship the product in worm mode, the root access is going to be disabled, right? Your data, when it lands in Cloudian, has been locked with object lock for a certain period of time, and this cannot be changed or deleted. So even if Dave tries to get in as a system admin user, that is not the same as having root credential, and even he or she will not be able to do anything to data that's in the object lock bucket that we have designated is completely tamper-proof. So it is actually tamper-proof, and it is protected from disgruntled employees as well. Okay, so it does protect against that scenario for sure. Sandran?
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Yeah, no,
Okay.
that's perfect.
Yeah, so next slide. I know I'm running out of time, so I'm going to be very quick and brief here. What I'm trying to show here is the exact workflow that is required to create this object-locked backups with Veeam and Cloudian. And guess what? It is exactly the same workflow as that you all know and love with Veeam. Okay, everything starts on the Veeam side. It is just like creating your regular backup workflow. You just point your backups to your S3 target by giving the URL and the password. When you do that, the only new stuff here is you will actually get a checkbox to say, do you want to make this an object-locked workflow? And if you check that, you get a dialog box for the duration for which the data needs to be locked in. So let's say you lock your data for, let's say 30, 60, 90 days, 60 days, and you then start your backup. Now, once the backup starts, this is all S3 API based. So Cloudian will automatically inherit these parameters from Veeam and create the data under lock. Create the bucket with the object lock based on the parameters that come from Veeam. And after this, every single object that's landing into that bucket is going to be locked for the duration that you mentioned. Even if you get hacked at this point, or you have a disgruntled employee, they will not be able to change, delete, or anyway modify the data for the duration that you have designated. And restores are straightforward. This is an online storage, so you can restore a clean copy in a matter of minutes. Okay, no manual step, and the same workflow that you already know and use. So it's as simple as that. And here are some resources for you guys to take a look at the Veeam Cloudian ransomware protection solution. And if you have any more questions, we are here to answer that. And that pretty much is the end of my presentation.
So we have a few questions that came over the chat during the presentation. We can start with those, and obviously we absolutely encourage everyone to ask any other questions. Keep in mind, guys, this is for you. So let's make sure that while we have all this brain power to the table here, brought to the table for us, we get our questions asked. So I'm gonna start with a couple questions that were for Danny. One was if I get hit by ransomware, but I don't have proper backups in place, should I pay the ransomware demand or not?
The question of the ages, Sandra. Thank you very much. Should I pay? Shouldn't I pay? So here's my advice on that. I don't like giving someone the answer to that question. I like giving them the pathway to get their own answer. Okay, and so what I mean by that is I'll give you an example of what I mean. So Atlanta, Georgia, they were hit with ransomware pretty hard. I think it was about 3 years ago or so, and the perpetrators were demanding $50,000. And Atlanta, Georgia was taking a stance of, hey, listen, we are, we are a municipality within the states, and we're not negotiating with terrorists. So they're saying we don't want to pay this, right? And I can respect that. If somebody tells me they don't want to pay something like that, I can respect that, right? And so they did their due diligence, and they said, in order for us to not pay this $50,000, this will cost us $2 million. And they said, they looked at each other, guys, do we all agree? Is this worth it? And they all agreed this is worth it. We're not going to pay. The problem was they did an initial very wrong estimate. And so as they looked into it further, they realized, actually, no, it's going to cost us $3 million. And then they were like, no, you know what? It's actually $6 million. And then it was, no, you know what? It's actually 12. And then it was, you know what? It's 13. I actually stopped checking at 13 million because it was stressing me out too much. right? And so what I say to you is when you decide to pay or to not pay, you want to ask yourself the question, do we really understand what this is here? And do we really understand the consequences, right? Because if you make a mistake like that, you get those numbers wrong, most organizations, they simply can't afford to pay $13 million. That's the difference between going bankrupt or not, right? But of course, I will add to that, I do love the proper precautions to be prepared before that with a bunch of things in your recovery department, things like backup, so you're not in that position. But yeah, to answer the question, I don't like saying don't pay or do pay, but understand the consequences that you are getting into in that situation before you make that decision. Great questions, Andrew.
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, it sounds to me it's kind of like going to an interview and being told that you're going to be paid like 10K, but they forget to say it's in pesos. So
yes,
it's the other way around. It's more painful. No, that's fair. How come that the law enforcement's like always basically say don't pay the ransomware? Like how would you comment on that?
Yeah, so I get asked that a lot because I always speak so favorably about law enforcement, and then I speak favorably about law enforcement, and they'll say, but Danny, the guys that you seem to like and the guys that you respect, they're always saying don't pay ransomware, and you'll notice I'm not necessarily saying that. I'm saying be careful, right? And so why is it that law enforcement says that? Well, I'll tell you why they say that, and again, why you need to make the right decision for you. I like to, before I tell you that, I like to say how I decide whether or not I'm going to trust the advice of somebody. There's three things that I look at. One is credibility, reliability, and third, agenda alignment, right? So does someone in law enforcement, cyber task force, do they have the credibility to give you good advice in a scenario like this? Of course they do. Do they have the reliability to give you good advice? Well, of course they do. It's a law enforcement in this world, sure, right? But does their agenda align with your most important agenda? Maybe not. This is where they differ, okay? What is law enforcement's most important agenda when it comes to cybercrime? The most important agenda is stopping the bad guys. It's not saving your business. That is not their most important agenda. As a business owner, as a business leader, most likely your most important agenda is saving your business. And yes, stopping the bad guys, that is a noble cause. And we're all trying to do that together. That is very noble, but as a business owner, it's most likely not your most important agenda. Your most important agenda is saving your business. So when somebody gives you that piece of advice and says, whatever you do, don't do this, or whatever you do, do this, you got to ask yourself, what's their agenda alignment? What are they basing? If they have the credibility, if they have the reliability, great. But why are they telling you that? What's most important to them? So yes, law enforcement will say that because the theory is if nobody ever paid, most likely ransomware would start to shrink. And by the way, I don't know if I fully agree with that statement, but that's a whole other conversation. But bringing it back to this, that's why law enforcement will continue to say that. It's simply based on the agenda that they're trying to do. Those of us that have businesses, we have a slightly different agenda.
Very good point.
I also say, weighing that assessment of how much you're paying also depends on your risk. So I'll debrief you. One of our customers that happened was attacked by ransomware was University of Calgary. Now, University of Calgary backs up their production data. There was no risk to their production data, but they didn't put the same kind of scrutiny on student data. Right, and ransomware happened to attack via student data, locked up a lot of students' final papers, and locked that data up. And the ransomware was asking for $25,000 for the ransomware. Now, relative for the University of Calgary, that was a very small minimum charge. Even though it was not mission critical to the production data, it was important to the principle of the organization, is that they want their students to feel that their hard work for writing their essays and long-term projects weren't going lost. They spent weeks and months of it, so they paid that ransomware, took the hit, and it was scoped to that because they had a good protection strategy against everything else. But they used that as opportunities once they paid immediately. Implement a new solution for protecting their students. So it all depends on you. You got to weigh your cost for your organization. Not your costs are not your priorities in your business are not the same as in others. So
that's a very good point. Yeah, that's a very good point indeed. It really becomes a business conversation.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, if no one else has anything to add to that, I'll move to the next question, which I really like because this one is really cool. It's about cybersecurity insurance. So someone is asking us, I heard cybersecurity covers ransomware payments. That being said, if I have cybersecurity, do I need to worry about having proper backups of my data? That's a loaded question. That's a really good one. I don't know who wants to take this, Denny.
So I'll take this. So I love cyber insurance. I've written about it. I've written numerous articles about it. I've got numerous posts about it, and I do think that it is a phenomenal piece of the puzzle. Okay, and so when I first, in case somebody doesn't know, what is cyber insurance? It's basically like regular insurance, except it's meant to protect against this sort of stuff, or rather to insure against this sort of stuff. I first came across it back in 2014. A client of mine had suffered a breach. The perpetrators took $2 million, and they were insured, and we didn't even know like what this was, and they got that $2 million back. And if not for that, I think they would have went bankrupt, right? But because of that, though, some people do have a slight misunderstanding, and they'll say, hey, well, if I have insurance, do I need a backup? Do I need this kind of security in place if I have the insurance, right? Here's here's why that's false, right? There's really two reasons for why that's false. One of the reasons is we have to understand that insurance can only help you out in situations that can be helped out with money. As an example, let's say you have the KFC secret recipe sitting on one server somewhere, and that access to that recipe, to that information, is basically the backblood of your your entire business, and somebody locks that down. No amount of money can pay to get that back unless you have access to those actual files. So then the thought is, well, I'll pay the bad guy. The bad guy will give it back to me. It's often the case where people do pay and they still don't unlock the stuff, right? So insurance, again, can only pay for the things that can be paid for with money. There are some things that simply can't be bought. On a smaller scale level, what if I have all these beautiful family photos sitting on one server and I get locked out of that server? Again, insurance can't buy those photos back if they're not sitting anywhere else. So that's one of the things that we have to consider where insurance simply can't compete with backups in that sense. But the other thing that we have to consider is somebody was telling me some stats, a president of an insurance organization I've done a lot of collaboration with. I really respect this guy. And he was telling me how in 2020, insurance organizations in Canada generated, X amount of revenue, but they paid out X amount more in payouts. So they're losing money on cyber insurance right now. And that's to be expected when you have a product that is relatively new. In the grand scheme of things, if you look at car insurance, auto insurance, it's existed for way longer than cyber insurance, and insurance industries really understand auto insurance and how that works, right? So they're still kind of learning with regard to the world of cyber insurance. But when we know, as long as we know that they're losing money on that, what does that mean? That means they're going to be aggressively tightening up those controls. Okay, so if you're of the mindset of, oh, I'm just going to buy insurance, and then, if trouble happens, I'll get these guys to insure me. Don't have to worry about the security. Don't have to worry about the backups. Most likely the people who approach going forward with that kind of attitude, they're going to be in for a very scary surprise when they do get hit and they go to collect their money, because there's probably going to be a clause now in that insurance saying, you didn't have the proper backup. You didn't have proper training. You didn't have proper this. We're not going to pay you because of that. Right. So just like any insurance, whether it's a house, there are clauses where people won't pay. So that I love insurance, but as a part of an overall solution, not as a replacement for it. The same way with car insurance. I have car insurance. I have home insurance, but I also still, got trained on how to drive. I also still have a seatbelt. I also still put many, many safety protocols in place. That is a last resort that will help with certain aspects of recovery. Sorry, somebody was about to say something, but I rambled on a bit there.
No, it's sorry. Go ahead, Amit.
I'm going to add something. Sandra and Danny, I'm going to add something to this. So we are actually working with a lot of our customers on on the Veeam Cloudian solution for data immutability, and I have some real world inputs right now. What's happening in cyber insurance? Cyber insurance is one of the hottest topics of discussions going on, and what has evolved here is, as Danny was saying, there are more clauses coming in, and guess what? One of the clauses is it's not just backup. Cyber insurances are putting clauses in there to say that you not only need to have backups, but you also need to have backups that are certifiably immutable for you to get a payout. This has happened with our customer. This has happened with our customer down in, and it's a joint customer between Veeam and Cloudian in Florida. And this is a huge financial concern based out of Miami. And their clauses, they need to have 6 months of data immutability in their backups to be able to get cyber insurance. They were not even getting a renewal of their policy, and this is in 2020. We have customers in Boston, a utility company, again Veeam Cloudian, that got a 15% discount on their cyber insurance if they could show data immutability solution implemented. And this story has kept repeating. And guess what? One of the other clauses in these contracts is a failure to maintain clause. So if the companies show at one point that they have immutability or they have backups that are immutable, they might get the insurance, but they have to prove at the time of attack that they had maintained this kind of a solution. And this is becoming key for cyber insurance companies. So cyber insurance is taking note. In fact, if you look at the Cyber Catalyst, the Marsh report, they're starting to rate data storage companies on the kind of immutability they offer to say that this is the kind of solution you guys should be implementing if you want to get pre-qualified on solutions that we can cover. So it is definitely something that you cannot just say that I have insurance, so I don't need backups or I don't need immutable backups. Guess what? You may not even get insurance if you don't have that. So that's
very good point.
That's something that
yeah, very good point, and I really like that. So it's basically make sure you understand the policy, because your pilot's policy, you might be out of your policy if you don't have immutability, and also check for potential savings if you have it, because a lot of folks out there, and to your point, Danny, well, if I have insurance, do I need to protect myself? Well, it's kind of the way I look at it is kind of like, well, if I have health insurance, do I have to still be careful when I cross the street? Well, yeah, because it's going to be painful if you get hit by the car. So, yeah, perfect. Okay, so let me move, because we have 2 more questions that I think are really, really good, and would love to get your perspective on. So we have one of the participants who's saying that our company relies on tape backup. Can the Cloudian and Veeam solution replace our tape environment?
Absolutely. I mean, tape backups are definitely something that where customers have used for a long time for backups, and they offer natural air gapping where you have tape that you put into a vault and what have you. Typically, it's a little kludgy and it takes a while to retrieve from tape, which makes it not the most natural fit for a ransomware attack, which is time bound. What you get with a Veeam Cloudian solution is the same amount of immutability. I mean, you definitely cannot make any changes once this data is written for a specific amount of time. And you also get the virtual air gapping, right, that Veeam specifically has architected into their backup workflow. So together, it definitely gives you an online system that gives you almost the same kind of air gapping, not almost the same, a virtual air gapping that you can potentially get, as well as the similar kind of immutability that tape has to offer. So a modern way of doing this. Rand, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I would say I've done a lot of financial analysis with a couple of customers about replacing tape with a Cloudian device. And it does vary based on your retention policy, but even with your retention policy, let's say you have 20 years might be a little difficult, but if you have a retention period within 55 years, I'm seeing the TCO analysis for a lot of people replacing it with tape with a cloud device makes a lot of financial sense. And I'll tell a little story. This is actually a real story of a customer in Canada. We had one customer, they're a property company. I won't say who it was, but they used to take all their tapes, and they had one of their properties, they had a vault, all right? And they used to put every single night, they put their tapes into the vault every single night, right? And they were doing that for 5 years. And I love tapes because they're cheap, they're cheerful, they're cost effective, and they're air gapped. But they kept putting in this vault, and one time they had to recover from that data. It wasn't a ransomware, it was just a data outage. But so they went back and grabbed the tape, no problem. They had it sorted well in the vault. They opened one up, blank. Second one, blank. Third one, blank. All of them were blank. Why? Is because every time they sealed the vault, it was magnetically sealed, right? And every single night, you backed it up, right? You sent that admin to go put it in the vault, and every single night they wiped them clean every single night. They didn't realize until it happened.
You just brought up some really bad memories that I have with my Michael Jackson cassettes.
Yeah. So anyway, that's a real story though for Canada. So.
Absolutely, and to add to that point, because Ryan, you touch on something that's very, very important here, especially in the type of year we've had. One thing that tape requires is presence, physical presence there to work with the tape library. And guess what? We didn't really have the luxury over the past year and a half, is to be wherever we wanted, whenever we needed to be. So tape, yes, that's one of the things that we see. One of the main reasons why people migrate off the tape, to conclude that is all these things that were mentioned here. One last question that I have here. Object lock protects data from being held for ransom. What about data exposure? I hope this gentleman tells you more than it tells me, because I'm not that technical. So whoever wants to take on this.
Right, I get this. This is coming from the thread that I mentioned of data exfiltration, right? So the new kind of ransomware attack is not just locking up your data, but even in the case of, let's say, object lock or worm, the data is still readable. So if the hacker can penetrate your endpoint systems or your perimeter security, they can read the data. And guess what? If it is customer sensitive data, they can just post the customer information online. And that itself is not just bad publicity for you, but you also have clauses that can hold you liable for protecting that data. So that's another kind of ransomware attack that's happening today. And that's actually the more forward-looking attack. So in that case, it's not the object lock solution you want. It is mostly on the security side, right? So Veeam and Cloudian both support encryption-based data storage, right? So whether it is data connectivity between Veeam and Cloudian that is SSL encrypted, or it's when the data resides in Cloudian, you can actually have it encrypted with 256 server-side encryption, AES-256, and that's like the highest level of encryption that you have. So even if a hacker gets in, tries to exfiltrate the data, they're just going to get garbage data, because unless you have that key, you cannot get in. And of course, the whole secure shell, authentication and access controls that you put in place are specifically for this reason, and that's how you protect against that threat of ransomware, of data exfiltration. So object lock may not protect you against that.
And that's from our customers as well. So thank you for that. And guys, thank you for everybody on the phone for listening in. Thank you for your participation.